All right, so in this unit, we've been talking about solving quadratic equations, okay? We've already looked at three methods so far. We looked at solve by graphing. I mean, the answers were wherever it crosses the x-axis. We looked at solving by roots. We're taking square roots of both sides. And we also looked at solving by factoring, the x method and the modified x method. Now, the problem is that even though these are all three different methods, the downside to these is that they only work in certain scenarios. In other words, they don't always work. They only work in certain scenarios. Okay, which means it's kind of a pain, right? We have like different kinds of questions and different methods to go along with it. Um, and sometimes a method doesn't even work, right? For example, if you're trying to factor something and it doesn't work with like the x method or the modified x method, you get stuck. Okay. Well, wouldn't it be nice if there was one method that worked every single time? And the answer there, yes, there is. Okay. And that's this idea of quadratic formula. Okay. The nice thing about it is that, again, it does always works. Okay. You could have one of the most complicated quadratic equations out there, and no matter what, even if it doesn't work by graphing, doesn't solve by roots, you can't factor it, you can always plug it into the quadratic formula, no matter what. Now, it's not always the easiest method, but it is a method that always works. Okay. And just remind you where the structure we're working with is standard form. So it's ax squared plus bx plus c. And whenever we're solving these things, typically we pretty much almost always want it equal to 0. Okay. So that's how we need it to look before we can even like think about using the quadratic formula. Okay. Now the quadratic formula itself looks very intimidating. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and write it on the screen so you guys can see it, but don't get scared because it's not too bad. Okay. So it's negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, one giant fraction all over 2a. Okay. Now, in previous years, I've always encouraged students to, if they can, to memorize this, right? Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Right? There's a bunch of different methods out there to memorize it. Even if you go on YouTube and just Google quadratic formula song, people have made songs to go along with these things to help you kind of remember it. Okay. For this class, I'll usually give it to you like on a formula sheet or something like that, but it is something that's going to come up quite often in math. So it's one of those things that if you can memorize it, great. If not, just make sure you know how to use it. That's the key thing. Okay. So the idea is that we're going to be taking the A, B, and C values. Remember, the A position is there, the B position is there, and the C position is there. We're taking those three numbers and we're plugging into the formula. Okay. Now, if any of those three pieces is missing, like it's not there, like at all, then we replace it with a 0. So keep that in mind as we go through these questions as well. But once you've plugged in those three corresponding pieces, it's just a matter of simplifying your answer down, and then you're done. And take advantage of using the Desmos calculator, because that's going to be very, very helpful, so you guys don't make any like small like calculation errors. Okay. But if you guys have a highlighter or like a colored pen or something, I would definitely highlight this equation. This is the formula you can use to get an answer to any quadratic equation. Okay. And then I just want to do one example with you guys so you guys can see how to approach these questions. Okay, so I'm going to leave that quadratic formula on the screen so you can see it. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. All right, so let's go into an example. Solve, x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Okay. And again, a couple things to check before you even start. Make sure it's equal to 0. That's very important. If it's not, you might need to rearrange some stuff, but this one is. And then we can just jump in. I would definitely label those three pieces. So we have our A, we have our B, and we have our C. Again, if any of those three pieces is missing, you can fill it in with a 0. Now be very careful. In this question, the A term is not missing. It's there. It's just the invisible one. Okay, when I say missing, I mean that the whole entire chunk is not there. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that in this question. The next suggestion I would make is rewrite that formula, but instead of the variables, just put an open parentheses. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. So we have negative b, so just put a parentheses, plus or minus, draw a long square root, and then b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then one giant fraction all over 2a. Okay. Now, I would definitely recommend having your notes open whenever you're doing like a homework question or a quiz question. Have that formula in front of you. That way, writing out these parentheses is not too big of a deal. Okay. All right. Now that we have parentheses in all of the variable positions, we're just going to plug in the numbers where they belong. Okay. So that first parentheses is a b, negative b. Well, our b term here is negative 2. So negative 2 goes in there. Our second parenthesis, looking at our equation again, our second parenthesis is also a b. So we're putting another negative 2 in there. Okay? Keep going down the line. Minus 4 times a. A in this question is 1. And then c in this question, make sure the signs go with it. C is a negative 3. All over at the bottom, 2 times a. And again, a is 1. Okay, so we plugged all the numbers in their correct spot. Now we just have to simplify this thing, which, again, here's where Desmos comes into play. Take advantage of Desmos, right? What I would do is I would go to your Desmos calculator, or you can just Google the word Desmos calculator. It's usually the first one that comes up. And I would plug in, I'm going to highlight it. I would plug in everything that comes underneath this square root, just as it's written. So plug this in. Don't do the square root symbol, just plug in the part that's inside. Okay, so plug in all the part I just highlighted in green. Plug that into Desmos. Okay, it'll give you an answer. Okay, in this example, if you plug that into Desmos correctly, let's go ahead and simplify. So the first thing is that the number on the outside, we had a negative 2. Well, that's positive 2. Oops, let me go back to a pen. So positive 2. Then plus or minus the square root symbol, and then comes the part that we plugged into Desmos. Okay, so again, everything underneath that square root, type into Desmos as it looks, with the parentheses, with that power of 2, just exactly the way it's written. Okay, in this question, if you do it correctly, it should come out that the answer to that highlighted part is 16. Okay, and then the bottom part, fraction, 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, still not done, because the square root of 16, that actually works out very nicely. Right, 16 is a perfect square. Okay, so let me go ahead and scroll down a little bit farther. Okay, so the square root of 16 we know, right? It's 4, or plus or minus 4. So we have 2 plus or minus 4. Remember, 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, divided by 2. Okay. Now, let's say it was a different number in there. Let's say it wasn't 16. Let's say it was square root of 15. Well, square root of 15 does not work out nicely. And then if it doesn't work out nicely, I would stop and go ahead and box that as your answer. So if this was a 15, don't write this down, but let's say this was your answer. 2 plus or minus square root of 15 divided by 2. If that was your answer, because we don't know what the square root of 15 is, it's some decimal, leave it as this. This would be your answer. Okay? So if you don't know the square root of a perfect square, just stop, box it, and you're done. Okay? But in this example, we do, right? Square root of 16 is 4. Okay, now what we can do is we can split it up into our two possibilities, right? One answer is if it's positive 4, so 2 plus 4 over 2. And the other answer is 2 minus 4 over 2. Okay, do those separately to get your two answers. So on the left side, 2 plus 4, that's 6. And then 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. So that's one answer. The other one, 2 minus 4, well, that's negative 2. And then negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So that would be our two answers to this quadratic equation. Okay. So again, just to kind of wrap this up, we will be practicing this more. So don't freak out if it's still confusing. But the idea is that we're starting with that quadratic formula. We're starting with that equation, plugging in all three pieces. Plug in A, plug in B, plug in C, and then simplifying to get your two answers. Again, the nice thing about this is that it always works. You don't have to worry about like, oh, is this going to factor? Or what's the graph going to look like? Is it too big? Right? It always works no matter what. Okay. So it's one of the better methods to use. Oops.